Hi, I'm Laura and welcome to the 6th episode of Get Your Greek On. Today I'll be joined by Emily and Odette and we'll be looking at the ancient Olympic Games.
Sport played a very important role in ancient Greek society, and athletic contests were a significant part of their culture. The most important athletic contests were attached to the four great Panhellenic festivals. Now, these were the Olympic Games held at Olympia, the Pythian Games at Delphi, the Isthmian Games at Corinth, and the Nemean Games at Nemea. Now, these were all connected to religion and they were all held in honour of gods. Have you got any idea of which god the Olympic Games are held in honour of?
I mean, I don't know why. I feel like maybe Ares or Apollo or Athena, kind of gods of war and quite physical. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking because it's Olympics, it sounds like Olympus. So is it something to do with the actual place where they live rather than an actual god?
I'll give you a clue. So the Olympic Games were the most important games.
Zeus. Was it Zeus?
Yeah. There were links to religion with it. So sacrifices and gifts were offered and athletes took oaths to obey the rules before a statue of Zeus. At the Pythian Games, they were held in honour of Apollo. The Isthmian Games were held in honour of Poseidon. And the Nemean Games were also held in honour of Zeus. So he was a popular guy. These four competitions became known as the circuits or the periodos of sacred crown games. And by winning all four games of the periodos, you'd become a Panhellenic or a circuit victor, and this was the height of athletic glory. So for tennis players, it would be the Grand Slam. For these, it would be the Panhellenics.
You're doing very well with that word.
Yeah, a lot of big words to start off with. Have you got any idea of which games were the first ones to be held?
I would have said the Olympia one, just because of the Olympics today are still called that.
I'm with you, Odette. Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. The Olympics began around 776 BC. Here you can see the Olympiad. So that was the 4-year period up to the next Olympic Games. And the Olympic and Pythian Games were on offset 4-year cycles, and the Isthmian and Nemean Games were on staggered 2-year cycles. So it meant that there was always going to be a contest every year.
They're so organised.
Want them to do my planning for me? Send them my diary.
So when I say Panhellenic, it just refers to all Greek. This means that they attracted visitors from all over the Greek world. The games were announced by heralds who would travel to all the major Greek cities in the Mediterranean. And regardless of the different dialects and the different rules and laws that they had, they'd all come together with their shared love for sport and their religion in common. I've got a question for you now. What do you think happened if there was a war going on?
I feel like they seem like quite get up and go people, so maybe they just carried on.
They do seem like that, but then on the other hand, we just had a global pandemic and even then the Olympics got postponed, so maybe they wouldn't.
So Emily was actually right. The games were the high point of the Greek calendar and they took precedence over everything else that was going on. So if there was a war going on, it had to be postponed and a truce was proclaimed. So this meant that everyone had safe passage travelling to and from the games and they were protected by the gods.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I'm happy I'll finally beat Odette a question as well.
Next question. Who was allowed to compete?
I feel like it's something to do with young men, just because I know it was really important for the Greeks generally to be really fit and healthy, but I especially know that men were taught from when they were boys Olympic sports. So I'm going to say young men.
Yeah, I think you're right. I feel like it's the firstborn child can go and play it, but only the male one if it's a woman. I don't think they were allowed to play.
Yeah, you're on the right track there. Basically, it was just only freeborn men originally who were allowed to compete. So it meant that slaves, women, non-Greeks, none of them could compete. All of the sons were allowed to play though, not just the firstborn. Wasn't quite inclusive at that time. Next question. What did the competitors wear?
They couldn't have worn a toga, could they? Because they'd trip up because it's quite long. So maybe they had like crop top, mini skirt versions with camel shorts or something.
That sounds very passionate.
It's like Sweaty Betty, the Greek edition. I mean, I feel like it was really hot, so probably not a lot.
Yeah, were they naked? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they were naked. equestrians, which we'll get onto, they were allowed to wear some clothes. So yeah, they were naked. This also meant that married women weren't allowed to watch the Olympic Games because this was just seen as unacceptable for them to see such sights, really.
Like naked attraction, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly like that, yeah. Right, what were the prizes?
I feel like you would have got some kind of trophy, or I don't know, like I feel like names were a really big thing in Greek society, like your status. So maybe you'd get like a really nice thing named after you, or you get like a nice title, kind of like a lord or something like that, but the Greek version.
Yeah, I'm thinking like with Dionysus, you get like a wreath, don't you? So maybe you get like you see the little leaf crowns and stuff. Maybe they get like something like that.
So the prizes were for the Olympics, alongside the other Panhellenic Games. They were known as the Crown Games, since competitors were only awarded a wreath. Now at the Olympics, they would have an olive wreath, which was connected to Zeus. So they're all connected to the gods, really, which type of crown they had. And there weren't any prizes for coming second or third, and they weren't given any money or anything like that. But although they didn't have any prizes like that, they were often showered with gifts and honours when they arrived home to their cities. So Odette was right with that. How many spectators do you think there were?
Quite a lot.
Wrong there.
I was going to say a lot, but not a lot of women.
No ladies.
Well, young women were allowed to watch. It was just if you were married, you couldn't watch.
That's surprising. I thought it'd be the other way around.
Yeah, you would have thought like the married women would be settled down, so it wouldn't matter as much. They're obviously a jealous bunch.
Over 40,000 spectators would come to watch the events. So looking at it nowadays, that's kind of like Stamford Bridge at Chelsea being completely full. Moving on to sport now. So which sports do you think were in the ancient Olympic Games?
I'm going to say it's like I can never remember what it's called, like the giant pitch where there's the track and they're running around and there's like discus and javelin. I feel like it was all of that.
Okay, so you're thinking about the decathlon.
That's the one.
Yeah, like running and things. Horses, they liked those.
We will look at the equestrian, also known as the hippic events, first. So there was chariot racing. Many sports originated from the skills of warriors. So with the chariot racing, chariots were actually used to carry warriors into battle. And the races were held in an arena called a hippodrome, which we're all familiar with, the hippodrome. 40 chariots would compete in a race, and crashes were very common. After the chariot race, there was the horse racing. Since it was after the chariot racing, the track was already churned up. Also, they didn't have stirrups or saddles because they weren't invented yet. So it was very dangerous. Was it possible for women to win at the Olympic Games? With the Olympic Games, it actually was possible for them to win. Only the wealthy could afford chariots and horses, and it was actually the owners who would win, not the racers. So women did actually have an opportunity to win, even though they weren't allowed to compete. Right, moving on now, we have the gymnic events. We have boxing. This was a very violent sport, and unlike modern day boxing, there was no distinction between ages and weights. They did have thin strips of leather around their hands to protect them, but there's nothing to protect the opponent. Have you got any idea of how the winner might have been decided?
Like death.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. There weren't any rounds, so they would just hit each other until someone was knocked out, or if they admitted defeat and raised their index finger. Although a lot of them didn't want to admit defeat, so they would just die rather than submit. Next up, we have wrestling. So this was fought with bare hands while standing up. And remember, all of them were naked.
No, you want to see me naked, naked, naked.
To win a match, a wrestler had to score 3 points. A point was awarded when one of the opponents touched the ground, if they accepted defeat due to a submission hold, or if they were forced out of the wrestling area. Next up, there is pancration. So pancration was actually a mixture of boxing and wrestling. So it's kind of like an ancient form of MMA fighting. Conor McGregor! With the pancration, it was considered to be one of the toughest and most dangerous games, and basically everything was permitted except for biting or gouging the eyes or the nose. So you can use your imagination as to what the kind of things they might have done.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
An awful lot of anger there.
Yeah. The game started off with just one event, which was a sprint across the stadium.
I'm just thinking they all had great tans as well, running naked.
No tan lines there. So the running events were all held on the same day. With the running events that were more than one length, they would actually run around a post, because just like the equestrian events, rather than it being an oval, it was rectangular and they'd have posts at either end. The pentathlon. So in the pentathlon, it was made up of 5 events that were all held on one day. So there was the discus, javelin, jumping, running, and also wrestling. They were all held at the stadion except the wrestling, and their training was often part of military service. They were thought to be useful in battle, all of these events. There is some debate about how they were scored and what the order was and things like that, but it is thought that the wrestling was probably at the end to determine the winner. With the jumping and the throwing, they had 5 goes at that, and then they'd take the best. With the discus, they'd throw on a podium, and the discus was normally made of bronze. With the javelin, it was a wooden javelin, and they'd have a little leather loop attached to it, so that when they threw it, it was meant to help their throw. It was meant to kind of extend their arm. And like the discus, it was measured for distance, but it was also thrown for accuracy. The most different one was probably the jumping event. They held stone or lead weights called halters, and what they'd do is they'd run up a little bit, and then they'd swing the weights forward to gain momentum to help them get further, and then they'd swing them backwards just before landing. Here we have a lovely sculpture by Myron showing a discus thrower. Pentathletes were admired for their bodies, and they were known to be kind of the most well-balanced athletes. And Aristotle actually noted them to be the most beautiful of all the athletes.
You're beautiful.
Fun fact, actually, in this picture, I had that the head was actually detached, and when they attached it, they put it on the wrong way. So he's meant to be looking at the discus behind him. So that's showing the wrong technique there. Oh, that is the end of my presentation. So I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few things.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. Honestly, it's so interesting to know there were so many different types of games, but so little clothing.